welcome back to the Cart Barn. This week, Greg and I welcome the voice of the Crimson Tide, Chris Stewart. Chris spent some time playing golf in college, but transitioned very quickly into broadcasting, and I think that was a great move for him. Greg, you've known Chris for a little while. Tell us a little bit about how you guys got to meet and help introduce this week's guest.
Hey, I've known Chris for, gosh, 20 years or so. Just through the media, you see guys in press boxes and you get to talk to him. And then I'm not sure if Chris showed up one day and was talking about his time playing against Stewart Sink as a junior golfer. But so that's how we kind of met each other. And then we always, when we'd run into each other, we'd ask each other what courses we'd played lately, how our golf games were. So it's become kind of a friendship. And Chris is a great guy. I think he's got some great stories about when he was growing up as a junior golfer and how he got into the game. And he just, how he got a break into the broadcasting industry. Back in the day, it was a lot. You worked your way up, and that's how he did. He wasn't like a superstar athlete and came out of college and got that job at Alabama. He worked his way up from doing high school games and got his break and his run with it. So I'm excited for our listeners to hear his stories about golf and a little bit about his time as Alabama's voice of the Crimson Tide. So let's jump right into Chris Stewart, the voice of the Crimson Tide.
That's sure. Today on the Cart Barn, we're excited to have the voice of the Crimson Tide, Chris Stewart. Most of you know who he is, but you may not know that he is also a golfer and played golf in college at the University of Montevallo, and we're looking forward to getting into some of his stories. Chris, welcome to the Cart Barn.
Chris, I appreciate it. If we're going to tell stories about my college experience, it won't take very long because I don't want to overstate what it was at that level for sure. But man, it's had a big impact on my life and some of the connections that I made through the game and Lord, now even getting to be with friends and so thankful that I can still play with some things that I've encountered in my life the last 5-6 years. So I'm really fortunate, but it's important to me, even though I've, again, when people introduce me as somebody who played in college, I say, you better have looked quick or you wouldn't have seen it. But I am honored and grateful that I got to do that.
Well, we are glad to have you, and we'll get into a little bit of that. If you would, just let's kind of go way back to how did you get into the game of golf and what kind of got you started?
I definitely did not have the traditional entry to the game as a teenager. I grew up in Fairfield, not exactly a golfing hotbed, even in the 1970s or 80s. But we lived about 10 minutes from a little driving range and par 3 course called West Side Golf. And I had really, a guy named Steve Humphreys owned it. And I think I got a starter set of left-handed clubs when I was probably Christmas one year when I was 12. I was just finishing up. I just played Little League Baseball, 12-year-old, and I decided I wasn't going to play anymore. Now, my dad had I think, basically run the ballpark in Fairfield, Forest Hills Ballpark, where I played. And I said, I'm not going to play anymore. I'm going to play golf. Well, it comes around to 13 years old, and it's time for sign up, Pony League. And Dad agreed to be president of the league again because nobody else would take it on. Small park, community ballpark. Okay. My best friend and I, who also had planned to retire, we had both played for our dads all through and weren't going to play anymore. Dads weren't going to coach anymore. We weren't going to play. Okay, it's time to sign up. Let's do it. So we go to play the first day of Pony League practice. We're out there, and we got a guy who's about 20 years old, never been a coach, but wanted to be one. And he gives us, he tells us after we've thrown and gotten loose, all right, guys, let's drop your gloves right up here by the dugout. Meet me down the left field line. So we go and we sit down there, and he starts talking about how things are going to be. And, we're going to run in just a minute. We're going to run to home plate. You're going to run home plate down the right field line to the pole there. Then you're going to run to the pole back here, and you're going to head back home. We're going to keep doing that till I tell you not to. So I'm just telling you right now, if y'all don't want to run, then y'all probably better not plan on playing. All right, guys, let's run. So we're down at the left field line. John Vines. I feel like Louis Grizzard saying, Wave and see Wanamaker, childhood friend and idol. But John Vines, my childhood best friend, still is. Send each other a half dozen inappropriate minimum TikToks every day at 54 years old. So John and I are running side by side. We're jogging. We're about 20 steps back towards third base and home plate. John says, what do you think? I said, I think I'm about to grab my glove and I'm going to go to the golf course. He said, I'm right behind you. So we're running in line with everybody else until we get to the third base bag. And then we both peeled out, grabbed our gloves, never stopped running, went out the gate, found my dad. I said, I have just retired. I want to go to the golf course. And I went to West Side. I hit balls all summer. A man named Jim Baldwin, who had lived in Dothan. Jim had been a salesman, traveling salesman. I think Jim had sold shoes and men's clothing before he retired. But Jim hung out at this old driving range in Powderly and gave lessons. And he comes over and sees me hitting balls, and he says, hey, my name's Jim. And he said, why don't you try holding it like this? And that's good. And so he goes, hey, is your dad here? And I said, yes, sir. He's right over there. So he goes up to my father and he said, introduces himself, and he said, hey, I give lessons here. I've seen your son number of times, and I think he's got a little talent. I'd love to work with him if you don't mind. And he said, no. He said, I don't want to charge you. I just like to try to help him. I think he could get pretty good. He said, well, if you believe in him, we'll certainly give it a shot. So Jim Baldwin started giving me lessons, took me under his wing. A year later, he said, I used to be a member at Dothan Country Club 30 years ago, and they've got a huge tournament called the Future Masters. He said, I'd like to make a call or two if you're interested. Now, keep in mind, I'd only played at this time, I think, maybe 5 or 6 rounds on a regulation golf course. I played Grayson Valley with Jim, shot 76 with 2 balls out of bounds. My first time to truly play. And he's calling Dothan to get me in the Future Masters. Well, somewhere in the box, I still have my 5 invitations to play at Dothan Country Club. And I qualified that first year. I shot 79. Thank God it rained. We had a rain delay, and I think those drives I was spraying with my persimmon driver were staying in the fairway because it was wet. And I somehow shot a 79. It's the only time in 5 years that I qualified. It's also the only time that I broke 80 on the golf course. But I made it once. And funny how life kind of works for you. I think the first round of golf the qualifying round that I played was with a guy named Jim Strong from Montgomery, who was a good junior player at the time. Jim and I wound up playing together at Montevallo. And so, this would be literally 4 years after the fact. But it was an opportunity for me. And I played in a little bit more, but another big break just in terms of people and way things work out. And this is one that I think you guys will really enjoy, because it was 2 worlds colliding for me. I pick up at that time the Western Star. I don't know if y'all have ever even heard of it, but it was community paper in the western area, Jefferson County, based out of Bessemer. and I see an ad that at Harper's practice tee, they were going to put on a junior clinic, 6-week junior clinic. It probably was all of $100 to get 6 lessons. May not have been that much, but my parents signed me up for it. I go out. I'm the only kid that's ever touched a golf club. And Lee Harper, of course,
Yep.
ran Frank House for years, and you guys know Lee and the fact that he played on the tour was a very good club pro and actually played in the PGA at least 1 year, qualified for that. But Lee had some older men helping him with that junior clinic that day. And one of them's this older man who sees me first and comes down. He goes, "Let me guess," because again, none of the other kids have touched a club. And I'm 15. I'm left-handed. I played in the Future Masters twice, and I think the Southern Junior at Saugahatchee that second summer as well. My only 3 competitive rounds that I'd ever played in, and I'm hitting ropes off that tee box in that practice range next to other kids who never played before. So I stood out a little bit. And this man comes over and he says, "Let me guess, you've done this before." I said, "A couple of times, yes, sir, but not very long." So he brings Lee over to watch me. And Lee said, "Son, you're pretty good. Where do you play?" And I told him at West Side Golf, which again is just a par 3 course and a driving range. He said, "I mean a regulation course." And I said, "Well, from time to time, I get to go and play some courses, but my family's not club. We're not club members anywhere." He said, "Your parents here?" I said, "Well, my mother's sitting in the parking lot waiting on me." He said, "I'd like to meet her." So he takes me to the parking lot, introduces himself to my mother, said, "Miss Stewart, your son's got some talent, and uh, he needs to be playing every day. Real course, not just a par 3. And she said, "Well, we'd like that too, but it's not really something we can afford. We're not club members." And he said, "I understand it gets expensive. That's why I'd like to make an offer. If this is the summer, obviously." And he said, "If you can have your son at my golf course every morning, he can wash carts in the morning, and at 12 o'clock, he'll be done, and he can play golf in the afternoon." And she said, "What time would you like him here?" And so my mother would drive me from Fairfield. We live right behind Western Hills Mall, and we were probably 1,000 yards at the most from Bessemer Superhighway. And we get on Bessemer Superhighway, and she'd drive me straight down to Bessemer to Frank House Municipal, right behind the old hospital there, and did that Monday through Friday for the entire summer. And it was kind of interesting. Those clinics were still going on. And on the Wednesday when the clinic would take place, my mother would drop me off at work. The clinic started at 10. And at 9 o'clock, the man who found me, if you will, spoke to me first, would come by the golf course, pick me up, and take me to the range, which was about 10 minutes away, and pick up golf balls. I'd help him shag balls and drive in the cart, pick them up, and then the clinic starts at 10. Well, that man was named Leland Childs, and he would tell me stories about his profession that he'd retired from. And Leland Childs was a radio broadcaster. And among the things that Leland Childs did in his career, play-by-play for Alabama football games. So at 15 years old, I first met a former Alabama play-by-play announcer. And looking back, I just think that is so cool. Another example of how one seemingly inconsequential thing or person in your life can come along, and how things can intersect, or one falls into the other. And I can see where golf led me actually to Montevallo. And even though I only played a semester as a walk-on, Montevallo had a communications department where they televised their home men's and women's basketball games on a local cable access channel. And on that little channel that, didn't reach a whole lot of homes, I got an opportunity and a start, which amazingly led to so many different opportunities for me once I got out of college. But
Wow.
yeah, the fact that I used to drive around in a golf cart at 15, picking up golf balls, listening to a man tell stories about being the voice of the Crimson Tide, and then I got to become that myself is pretty amazing.
I think, that there's so many similar stories, just, random guys, adults in our youth that really set in motion a good
Yeah,
part of your life. And without those people, just randomly coming up to and offer an act of kindness, helping you with your swing or, whatnot, we wouldn't be where we are today.
sure. No, I agree with you. And, um, the thing about it with golf, I felt like I kind of had the best of both worlds. Um, I got to play with some really good guys. And again, I was never the best finish I ever had in what would have been considered a big tournament at the time in the state of Alabama. I think I finished I think I was 15. I finished, I think, tied for third, and on the scorecard playoff, I was fourth in the Southern Junior at Saugahatchee, which was a pretty good tournament at the
Yep.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was probably like a lot of kids. And it's why I love the fact that my 13-year-old is interested in the game and is more talented at 13 than I ever was. Um, has shot a lower score than I ever did or will, and has done well in the BGA. And we're starting to move him up. I understand fully that while I joke and refer to him as 401k because he's my only retirement plan, there's so many kids that are really good between probably 13 and 15, and then 16 comes along, and some guys decide that driving a car is a whole lot more fun than driving golf balls all day long. And there are other distractions that tend to come along with that
Mm-hmm.
that can have guys that are pretty talented maybe steer away. And there are guys that I know a prime example, guy that I played with a lot because, frankly, in most junior tournaments, he was pretty average like I was. I was at the bottom of the B division or the bottom of the A division or the top of the B division, it seemed, in any good tournament that I played in. So, again, I was a middle of the pack player. But at that same time, Dickie Pride was pretty much that as well. But it was around his senior year of college, Dickie decided, you know what, I really want to be good at this, and it's time to get after it. And he did. He had great talent. Of course, you guys know his father was a great player, and um, Dickie really got good. And one of the coolest celebrations I've ever had. And Dickie and I weren't tight. We still know each other, occasionally communicate, but uh, one of the biggest personal celebrations that I've ever had watching a sporting event, I'll tell you the two biggest. Watching Dickie Pride run in about a 10 or 15 foot putt to force a playoff with Hal Sutton in Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that was 94, 95, somewhere in that range, where he hadn't been on the tour very long. And Hal Sutton was trending at that time, you guys remember, to be maybe the next Jack Nicklaus. He had kind of the Golden Bear look. He had the forearms like Jack did, and was doing really well on the tour. And dadgummit, if a guy that I hadn't played several rounds of golf with didn't beat him, because on the first playoff hole, I think Dickie ran in a 20-foot birdie on him to win the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so cool to see a guy that guy was better than I was, but somebody that was a peer of mine at one point, a guy that I did compete with, to do that. And also, it's so funny, and I think I've sent you this before, Greg. It's my biggest claim to fame, maybe in a golf deal. I won the B division at Vestavia in their junior invitational. And the only reason it's even noteworthy, the clip was about that big in the Birmingham Post Herald, rest its soul. And it had that, I think Charles Allison won the tournament. John Gross III finished second. Chris Stewart won the B division. And winner of the 14 and under group, it's this guy named Stewart Sink.
Yeah.
And that summer, it was later that summer, I played a practice round. We had a mutual connection. He lived in Florence at the time, and he had a mutual connection. I wish I could remember the guy's name, because this guy and I played a lot of rounds at that time, and I've just forgotten over the years. But it was a mutual friend, and we got paired playing a practice round together at Shoal for U.S. Junior Amateur qualifying. And not surprisingly, I'm 17, Stewart's 6'2", and a 14-year-old. He's the qualifier for that. 36 holes the next day, and I don't know what he shot, but it was double digits better than I did. And he was out of about 36 players from the Southeast, he qualified. And, looking back I never thought I'd pull against Tom Watson, certainly in his 50s, played in a major. But like, son of a gun, I've played golf with that guy. I can only imagine what it's like for guys that, played high school football. Well, I can't imagine, because I know some of those guys. Played high school football against Bo Jackson. Well, I got a tackle. I tackled Bo once. Okay, he actually ran over me, but he fell, and that went down as a tackle. And that's kind of how I felt, having played golf with guys like Dickie Pride and Stewart. We weren't colleagues. We weren't rivals. I wasn't good enough. But I got to enjoy their success, because at one time as a kid, I was chasing the same dream, and they got to fulfill it. And I'm happy for them. Our dreams sometimes change, and sometimes you remember that dream that you had when you were 4 years old and you were a kid, and you pretended you were Coward Hosell watching Monday Night Football, because that's what I thought at 4 years old his name was Coward Hosell instead of Howard Cosell. And son of a gun, you become the voice of the Crimson Tide. Again, those dreams change, but it's cool to see people achieve them, whatever they may be.
Absolutely.
Well, I have one question I've got is, how in the world did you find a left-handed persimmon driver? Those
Had
things
to look
didn't go
hard.
on trees.
No, they may have whittled that one for me. It was not high dollar. The best one I had, I know, was used. That's how most of my clubs have been bought over the years. It's just crazy. There weren't a ton of left-handed clubs back then, and there weren't a ton of left-handed players. Bob Charles, I think, had won the British, was the only one to win a major. In fact, this is how naive and arrogant I think we are when we're young. Jim, I had played in the Future Masters at least once, maybe twice. Yeah, I think I was 15. And it may have been after the summer that I was 15 years old, but Jim tried to switch me from left-handed to right-handed. And his reasoning was, there's more equipment available, and Chris, I've got enough clubs, and I can keep you in clubs till you're old enough and you can buy what you want. But I've got better clubs than you do, and I can keep you in sticks for a while that would allow you to be a little more competitive. So we tried it for a month, and I had some success, just hitting the ball and getting better. But one day he could tell I was really frustrated. Again, I'm 14, maybe 15. And Jim's in his early mid 70s at the time he's giving me these lessons. And I can see him sitting in his director's chair that he popped out with the old VHS camera system and the you know umbrella stand above so you could see through the glare like I'm trying to see you guys now. And he'd have a Lucky Strike in the big wide brim hat. I got to send you guys a picture of me and Jim because I'm about that big around, and Jim's got the hat and the beer belly, and great teacher. He had learned originally under Sam Bird and then Jim Ballard.
Yeah.
He and Joanne Beto gave lessons together out at Westside a good bit, and Joanne was kind enough to watch me and work with me some. But Jim asked me, he said, why don't you want to try this right-handed? And again, I was only 15. I didn't cuss a lot. But I said, because damn it, Jim, a right-hander's already won the Masters. And Jim looked at me and he goes, ha, 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 ha. You're great. Go get your clubs.
Yeah.
He thought it was the best answer in the world. And I guess now that I'm a father, have my own kids, and you understand competitive nature, you love to hear that. I never got close to it. I'm fortunate somebody was kind enough to take me to play Augusta, but I will never tee it up in the Masters,
Yeah.
and never came close. But he loved that desire to be the best I could be, and that was really cool. So I almost went right-handed, but I'm thankful that I stuck around and played lefty because it's made it a little unique and had fun. Got to play in the state left-handers when I was 16 years old and enjoyed that. And a lot of people that you play in high school matches. Tom Wildman was a teammate, really good player. Tom got better than I was for a good while there in high school, but he was a lefty also. And it was so funny. We'd play high school matches, and I'm playing one, or Tom's playing number 2 on the team behind me, and we'd get on the number 2 tee, and they'd see another lefty hitting into number 1, and they go, "Son of a gun, how many of y'all got?" So it was unique. It was fun, and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned Lee Harper. Certainly knew Lee very well. He and my pro Elvis Larkin were both best of friends,
Yeah,
and did it. They talked every day, and so I, as a result of that, growing up, in the same time frame as you're talking about here, and getting to know them, and he's really one of the, I guess, one of the guys that prompted this podcast. Is that
yeah,
I got to looking at guys like him and Judd Stockard from up in the Florence Shoals area, and Alex Sloan and Hubert Green and others that have gone on and no longer around, and those stories of that they had and stories about them disappearing. And Greg and I started talking about, and that was really kind of the genesis of this podcast. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. And
yeah.
talking about your son, I've had the privilege of meeting him. What a fine young man, and what a great golf swing he's got.
Well, you're very kind, and you just made me feel really good, and uh, the proud papa inside my chest starts to swell a little bit when you hear
Well,
that. He fell in love with it, and I have to credit his mama for everything, and also Mickey Smith, who uh,
mhm,
just phenomenal. Anyway, met Mickey uh, after the fact, but I met Mickey because of my son. My
yeah,
as I said, my my son's mom, my wife at the time, was uh, I'm doing a baseball game, and I know that Parker's going to go. Excuse me, Hudson. Parker's my older son, but Hudson is
Yeah.
going to go with a friend of his for this thing called PGA Junior League. Now,
Mm-hmm.
Hud had tagged along with me a couple of times, but we never really worked with him. He never shown that much interest, other than just hit a few while I'm in between me playing shots on a hole. Well, she sends me video while I'm calling a baseball game of him getting his first little bit of instruction in this. Well, I check about an hour later, hour and a half later, still doing on the air doing a game, and I check Life 360, and I see they're heading down 280, and I'm thinking she's going to her mom's. Well, I look back 15 minutes later, and they're at PGA Superstore. And I text her. I said, well, that didn't take long. She said, well, Mickey said he needs longer clubs. I said, who the heck's Mickey? She goes, Mickey Smith. He's the pro at Bentbrook, and said he needed longer clubs. Well, I get back in town from wherever I was, and she's bought in the PGA Kids starter deal for like $250. And I said, babe, I know that I was only a walk-on, and I know I'm not any good now, but come on. It's the one thing I had a shot at helping him with. Could you not let me take him? She goes, well, Mickey said he needed him. I said, well, heaven forbid that, I contradict Mickey at all. Well, sure enough, Mickey was right then. Mickey's been right about everything.
Mm.
HUD's played in their junior tournament, their junior program, and gotten to play in the BGA, and HUD's got some talent. Those are Mickey's words. And got an opportunity to do something with a game, and we're trying to figure out that next step. I don't want to go nuts with this with him. I understand, just like baseball and uh, you know football, soccer, whatever the sport is for youth leagues, you can get ahead of yourself. You can get ahead of your skates or your skis pretty easily on
Sure.
this, and I don't want to go nuts. But right now, it's been wonderful for us, a bonding thing for my son and I. It's been great for his growth and development as a person. Um, his mama doesn't know squat about golf, but that doesn't keep her from trying to coach him up. And he is polite, respectful, and looks at me and winks and says, yes, ma'am. And then goes on and figures out what he needs to figure out. But it's been special for us as a family getting that time on the course. And I'm excited to see where it takes him. It may not take him down the path of golf beyond what he's doing already, but it opens doors and provides connections that you never know what they're going to be. And that's one of the great things about the sport as well.
Sure it is.
Absolutely. So, kind of segueing over, and I would love to hear your public access tapes from men's and women's basketball games at Montevallo. But
We're going to have something stronger than bottled water. I know that, Greg, if we're going to watch them.
how did you kind of go from that? How did it evolve into where you're at now?
Well, I did that first Montevallo game, and it was part of a class. I mean, we got 3 hours credit for broadcasting the games, and it was my first time to see a Montevallo game. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to prepare. I just sat down, and I'd played high school basketball and really liked the sport and wanted to be a broadcaster. I had anchored a couple of sports casts on the campus station, so I'd been in front of the camera, but I'd never done play-by-play other than when I was a kid, every Saturday practically growing up and watching college football and watching basketball on TV. And so I sat down and started saying what I see, which is what I still tell kids today that want to get into it. You want to be a play-by-play announcer, get as many reps as you can and simply say what you see. So I did that my first game. And I know, because I did go back one time, I'm not exactly sure where it is. I could find it. I do have a VCR in my home. So if I find the tape, I am going to put it in. but it was horrific. I know that. But when I got back to the classroom, the old MassCom building, which is not even there anymore at Montevallo, Bill Duke was our professor. Had as much of an impact for me broadcasting wise as Jim Baldwin did in golf. And Dr. Duke was standing there, and he had kind of a sly grin on his face and his arms folded, and he goes, "Well, I think we found ourselves a play-by-play announcer." And just that one little word of encouragement was phenomenal for me. And I wanted to get better at it, and I knew right then I didn't want to do anything else. I'd played that semester of golf. I was getting ready to start the second semester, and we're going to get going in the spring. And it didn't break his heart. He was very kind about it, but I don't think it broke Leon Davis's heart, our golf coach and athletic director, when I broke the news to him that his walk-on wasn't going to play anymore. But he still treated me fantastic. Montevallo was a small school that, if you were kind of part of athletics at all, you were part of a family. And I've been amazed at how much it's like that, frankly, at Alabama. But really, in a small, at that time, NAIA program like Montevallo for athletics, we had the same type situation, or even more close knit. And all the coaches were great to me, and very, very helpful. And man, I did that. All I wanted to do was call games. I knew I wanted to call games. And in all seriousness, most of our games that we broadcast, especially, were on the weekends, were on the Saturdays. Well, I had qualified in that fall season that I did play. I think we had 5 spots that traveled, and normally there were 3, usually 4, that were already locked in, and we would maybe qualify for 1 spot for the next tournament. Well, I'd qualified for 4 out of 6 tournaments in the fall, so I did get to compete, and thought I was going to have a chance to compete again, but I knew my heart wasn't in it. That 89 or 90 that I shot in the Alabama Intercollegiate at Spring Hill, my final tournament, I think propelled my collegiate broadcasting career as much as anything. But it was so much fun, and I felt so much passion for it. And I don't know that I have wanted to do anything else since then. I just loved it. So many people were kind enough to give me opportunities where I got a chance to get better. 4 years of doing those games. Also, I was working for a little AM radio station 5 minutes or so from campus in Calera. Nobody listened to that station, but I was on radio, and I thought I'd made it. And I'm doing high school football on Friday nights on tape delay, because it's a daytime only signal. So I'm going to the game with an old Marantz recorder on my shoulder. Here's where that station played an impact. It's play by play in the old Marantz recorder, where you'd have to play record and pause. You had to press pause first, then play record. Okay, then release pause, and you could start recording with your microphone there. And I'd stand either in a corner of the press box with a roster in my hand, or sometimes in the top of the stands, wherever I could get, and do the play-by-play, sometimes with a color analyst, sometimes without, and do that. And at 7 o'clock on Saturday morning, I was back in the station, or had the tapes dropped off so that somebody else could play the tapes and play the broadcast and pause it. The reason the play, record, pause is important, I got to cover when Ben Franklin, that's how old I am. Benjamin Franklin was my first boss. Not that one, but I think he was close in age. He was so old. Ben Franklin makes me the sports director for the station. So I'm going to do high school football, and I can cover anything else that I think I should. Well, the PGA was coming to Shoal Creek in 1990, summer of 90, and a year out, I started writing and calling, trying to find out what was needed to get credentialed to cover the PGA Championship. Well, dang it, I got to. And it was a wonderful experience. Networking wise, I met so many people. And among them, the things that I got to do a 5-minute walk along conversation with Fuzzy Zeller. I'm barely 20. I may still be 19, but I'm doing a walk along conversation for 5 minutes with Fuzzy Zeller. Now, here's the deal. It wasn't supposed to be a 5-minute conversation. It was supposed to be a 5-minute interview with Fuzzy. But because I failed to press pause again and start that recording, there ain't any recording of it. It was awesome getting to visit with Fuzzy. But when he shook my hand, walked away, and I looked down and realized I had not released pause on that tape, I was about as dejected as I'd ever been at that point. I had a great one-on-one conversation, but I did not have an interview because there was no way to prove that conversation took place.
Oh, wow.
Did you feel like your career was over at that point?
Me and Fuzzy were the only ones that knew that conversation had taken place. And for the most part, it stayed that way, except for telling stories like this right here.
Hey, when I worked at the Coleman Times, the publisher's wife was big into the society stuff, and they sent me to take pictures at some charity soiree. And I didn't know anything about a camera, and it was the old film load camera, right?
Yeah.
So I shoot pictures for an hour. I get back to the paper. There's no film in the camera.
Oh, of course. Of course.
And it's the publisher's wife, man. I mean, I might as well just started, packing up my bags and leaving. Well, I make a phone call and find a lady who had taken pictures at the event, and I begged her, and she let me have some pictures, and I kept my job, and now I'm retired from newspapers. But that stuff just happened.
And if you know then what you know now, she'd have done you a favor if she'd fired you. It would have exactly. That's what I tell people all the time that want to go, and they say, "What do you tell kids that want to go into broadcasting?" I said, "Well, if I like them, I'll spend some time and answer their questions. If I really like them, I'll convince them to go into something else." So try to do them a favor. But no, I mean it's so funny how those things happen. And another thing, Shoal Creek. I got to play in the media day event. Heck, Greg, you probably played in that too.
I played in it also. Yep.
Yeah. I got paired with Tommy Hicks, who I'd never met before. Well, Tommy winds up in a bind. Tommy and I became good friends. And 25 years later, Tommy's in a bind. He said, "Hey, I'm about at my deadline." And this is almost 20 years ago now. This is not like in the last 5 years. It's about 20 years ago. He goes, "I've written this book, about Alabama. I've written this book, and I'm almost at the deadline, and I need it. Would you write the foreword for me?" I had a couple of other people that had told me they would, and but I haven't been able to get through to them. "Can you write the foreword?" And I was so flattered. I said, "Tommy, I'm just the number 2 baseball guy, and I've done basketball for a year, and I do a little bit on the football." He goes, "It's great. You're fine." So here I am. Tommy's another guy that invested, took a shot on me, and now that forward's got a whole lot more meaning to it now than it did back then.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when you've now ascended like the holy grail of play-by-play. What is that like in, when it transpired? I mean, you taking over your Lou Gehrig, I guess, or whoever took over for Lou Gehrig, I forget what his name was.
Wally Pipp.
Wally Pipp takes over for Lou Gehrig. How did that feel? And you'd worked with Eli. You'd been the
Yeah.
sideline guy and stuff in football, but all of a sudden now you're the new Eli Gold. How has that been?
Ooh, man, I'm flattered you would say that, and I know the spirit with which you mean it, but there ain't going to be another Eli Gold. It's what I've been telling people. I said, I need to be real clear. I'm not replacing Eli. You can't. I'm following Eli. And I'm so fortunate that I've been given that honor. Uh, I've already told you the story about Leland Childs. Well, after Leland Childs, because back then, I think there was no official network. There were multiple stations that could, if you wanted to broadcast games, you could go and do your own broadcast. And Leland was worked for one of the stations that did. And I've got to look at it again. I think he and John Forney did work together on
Oh,
the
wow.
on the Alabama network early. But when it really got going, Maury Farrell was the first network announcer, I believe. And John Forney worked with him, and then John followed him and, of course, had the job for 30 plus years. I got to know John late in life, interviewed him for a story with the Over the Mountain Journal that was my first, uh, it was my second out of college job. My first one, uh, I think, lasted about 8, 9 months, maybe. It was a radio job that, long story that doesn't really matter, but it was one that I walked away from out of respect for a friend who had hired me, and he was not retained. And out of loyalty to him, I walked away. Um, and broadcast wise, I probably shouldn't have. It probably wasn't a good move at that time, but it turned out because I don't know if I would have met John Forney otherwise. And I met John Forney doing a story about him for the Over the Mountain Journal that really didn't have much to do about broadcasting. It was about something in the social scene that he was going to be a part of. And that's why I was interviewing him. But I did get to talk to him and know him and discuss broadcasting and him calling Alabama games. And he was kind enough to listen to a cassette tape of mine and give me feedback and tell me what he thought. It was very encouraging. And it meant so much to me that he would. And so that's why, obviously, having worked with Eli for 20 years, but Paul Kennedy, who had the unenviable task of following John, um, was, it has been terrific to me. And so I'm real clear to say I'm not replacing Eli any more than Eli was replacing John Forney, because John did the games. Then Paul followed him for 4 seasons, I believe, during the Ray Perkins era. And then they brought John back for a year. And then Eli replaced John. It followed him, excuse me, after that season. So you don't replace John Forney. Looking back, as good as Paul Kennedy was, tough to follow as well. There's no way that I'm going to replace Eli, nor should I. He was and is and shall forevermore be beloved by Alabama fans, and he's earned that distinction. And it would be foolish for me to say that I'm replacing him. But you do have to put somebody in there to be next, and I'm honored that I would be given that responsibility, because that's how I treat it. It's an honor to be chosen, but there's a responsibility to those three men and to the memory of Maury Farrell as well. And I feel a responsibility to Leland Childs also to make sure that 15-year-old that he was driving around picking up golf balls doesn't screw up the legacy of a job that he and so many men after him worked so hard to uphold.
Well, that's well said and a great story. When you got to Alabama, didn't you start in basketball or
It's
was it
interesting.
baseball?
Forgive me, the water went down funny.
That's okay.
So the way I got involved, these are more dominoes. I've said for a while now, and I am actually working on it with Tommy Ford. There's no real timeline for it, but Tommy Ford's helping me. Uh, I've always joked that if I learned how to read, I was going to write a book, and I can't very well, so Tommy's just going to write it for me. But um, it's going to be about dominoes, which goes back to something with my grandparents that I won't go into, but also how, when you're a kid and you're stacking dominoes, as I did at their house, one domino falls into the next, falls into the next, falls into the next one. Well, that's really how my life and my career have been. One has fallen into the other, which fell into the other. And in doing those games on Montevallo cable access, um, led to me doing Montevallo high school games for another access channel that was run by a man named Don Early, who gave me the opportunity to do high school games for him after I graduated. And then Don also got the rights to do um, Alabama, Auburn, and UAB games, and even I think some Troy and Jacksonville State games at the time on a tape delay basis on his statewide network of little community channels.
Hmm.
Well, working for him got me in working with Alabama and doing tape delay broadcast of football, basketball, men's and women's, some volleyball matches, some gymnastics meets, and baseball. Well, after a year of doing that, there was an opening to work with David Crane on the baseball broadcast. And David asked me to come work with him, and CTSN did. So I was truly working. I was approved by the network to do those replay broadcasts, but I was truly working for the network as a freelancer doing baseball with David. At the same time, I'm doing Birmingham Southern basketball and got to do that for 8 seasons. And Dwayne Rebold created that opportunity for me. And when Joe Dean came back as the athletic director and they went briefly Division I, it raised the profile a little bit and helped me get a little more visibility. And being connected with Joe certainly helped. But I got more involved in the basketball community, things with the Birmingham Tip-Off Club when they did the state high school tournament, and they made sure that I was involved in the state radio network. Well, all of a sudden, I've got a little bit of a resume built. And 3 years after being the number 2 guy on Alabama baseball, I was picked somehow, some way to be the guy that followed Eli for that. And I'm about to start my 23rd season of doing Alabama basketball.
Mm-hmm.
But it's amazing that those cable channel broadcasts got me in the door. Being the number 2 guy for baseball got me in with the family, so to speak. And then I was chosen to do men's basketball and have had such a wonderful experience and run. And in doing that, even though everybody misses Eli, I think that it was a little more palatable for them than it was when Paul Kennedy came in. Even though Paul was a phenomenal broadcaster, he was 29 years old. He was coming from Vanderbilt, and he was replacing the then legend, John Forney. And that's a challenge, no matter how good you are. And he's got some phenomenal calls. Bless you, Mike Shula is still one of my favorites on the call to beat Georgia. And he and Doug Layton and the dueling, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good on Van Tiffin's kick. Still one of the best ever, even though we only had a 4-season run. But it was a tough deal for him to follow John Forney.
Yeah.
At least Bama fans didn't have to ask who I was. Now, they did 23 years ago when I got the basketball job.
Yeah.
They were, who is this guy? And I don't blame them. And I wondered who this guy was too when I sat down to do my first game for basketball. And it's preseason number 8 Alabama, preseason number 3 Oklahoma, and I'm sitting at Madison Square Garden, 2 seats down from Dick Vitale. You talk
That's a
about surreal
little
moments.
pressure. Yeah.
That was it. But I'm just so fortunate that when they were making a move, that I was given the opportunity and the honor to be
Yeah.
next.
Well, you touched on great calls, and I want to get to that, but I've got a question about calling the three different sports there. I mean, I know you did some others, but of the three, which one do
Whew.
you just really enjoy the most, and which one is the hardest?
They're all a challenge. They're all different, obviously. Um, the pace of basketball,
Hmm.
the scope and range of a football field, and the key pieces that you need to identify when a play is going on. Um, baseball, the same thing. Baseball can be the most boring thing in the world for certain stretches, and you never know when something phenomenal is going to happen. So you've got to be able to basically do a talk show. But if you're in the bottom of the ninth and you're broadcasting for the home team and you're down a run and you've got runners at second and third with 2 out and a 3-2 count, there's a ball hit through the gap left side, tying run is scored. Here comes Smith around third. They're going to wave him home, and there's a relay play, and you've got to hit each of those points or try to. Um, man, there's nothing like that. But
Mm-hmm.
also basketball game winners and the football, the limited college football at Alabama that I've been fortunate to do play-by-play for. But 2 years ago, when I was filling in for Eli when he was sick, and I got to call the Texas A&M win, where literally just feeling like a fan, feeling like we stole something, and I said, "Let's get out of here! Like, for the love of God, it's over. Before they change something, let's get out of here." Having no idea that would catch on and be something that would resonate with people to the point that they're going to put it on a T-shirt.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it is very, very um, special to have that connection and those opportunities. And that's me rambling, trying to come up with an answer for you because I don't know which one I like best. It really gets down to what's in season. I've done more basketball probably than well, I guess technically baseball now, just because the number of games there are. And I've retired from baseball. I'm not doing the radio anymore. I'm doing some of the SEC Plus streaming. I gave it up after 24 years because, frankly, I wanted to have more time on the golf course with my son.
Mm-hmm.
I missed so much during football and basketball, and thankfully the network gave me an opportunity to peel back on that a little bit. Plus, we had a really talented broadcaster in Roger Hoover who'd paid his dues and earned an opportunity to have that as truly his. And the timing was very, very good. And it was the very next year that they uh, told me that I had the football responsibility as well. So it's now, man, basketball, the pace, and getting to call a Final Four was really special. But I got to call a Final Four in football too, and sitting there and calling the kickoff at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, even though we didn't get the finish we wanted, just like we didn't get the finish we wanted in basketball at the Final Four. Man, that's pretty special. That's as my dad would have said, man, that's pretty good for an old Fairfield boy.
I think, baseball, if you listen to the really good baseball play-by-play and color guys, they do such a good job of interweaving the game and telling stories because there's so much downtime
Yeah,
in baseball. As
I agree.
basketball, it's such a frenetic pace. You don't have time to tell stories about so and so back in '57 who had 4 hits and drove
Yeah.
in 12 runs, whatnot. Seems like baseball would be a little more difficult from that aspect in that you've got so much filler time.
Yeah, and it can be because you really, as you start a story, you don't know if it's going to be a 3-pitch half inning or if it's going to be a 30-minute half inning. And the ability to tell maybe that same story in 30 seconds or stretching it over 30, that can be a challenge. Not that you would, but you know what I mean. One thing
Yeah.
kind of leads to another. Uh, but also the ability to go, let's put that on pause and come right back right after this message from our local stations or whatever
Yeah.
your out cue happens to be. I guess there's an art form to that. And man, it makes me, appreciate guys like Mel Allen and Vince Scully, certainly, and so many of the other greats that have done it for so long or did it for so long and literally had you on the edge of your seat as a kid or as an adult, hearing them go through all of those moments.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of segueing back to the golf, did you play much with Coach Saban? Did you get to play at all with Coach Saban?
Yeah, I've never played a full round with Coach Saban, but I've played in his golf tournament a few times, and he always hits a shot with everybody in a par three, and I got inside of him one time, first time, uh, and I think they did a challenge back then. You could put you could bet however much you wanted, and if you got closer than Coach, then you could get, I think, maybe half of it back or double. I don't remember what it was, but there was some sort of deal. All I knew is I didn't have a whole lot, but I was going to throw a 20 down and try to beat him just for the argument of beating him, and he knocked it pretty close. But I think it was on 17 at North River. It was either 8 or 17, but I got it. I got it to 5 feet, and he looked at me and went, "Damn!" And I feel like I've done something.
Well, all right. Since you're running out of battery and
I'm
we
so
don't,
sorry. I apologize.
no, that's fine because we're going to get you back on here to give us some really inside scoop on being the voice of the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting, and I think there's going to be a lot to talk about, a lot of good
Yep.
stuff. I'm flattered you guys would ask me and have me be a part of this because I know there's a whole lot better people you have had on and will have on afterwards. So it's kind of like my golf career. I don't belong, but I'm flattered you'd include me.
Well, we're glad to have you, Chris. Thank you so much for your time and for all you do for Alabama and for coming on the podcast. Thank you again.
Yeah, we
No, glad you
appreciate
guys
it.
are doing it. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Chris. Go.
Well, Greg, that was an awesome chat with Chris Stewart. And there's still a whole lot more that we could have dived into. Maybe we can have Chris back on again to finish some of his stories and dive into a few things that we didn't get to.
I think one of the most interesting things I got out of that conversation with Chris was that he had never played golf with Coach Saban. You would just think two golfers are being around the facility that much. At some point, they would have hooked up and played around. But I guess that just shows how busy both of them were during Coach Saban's time there and Chris's time. So that was an interesting tidbit for me. So, but we're happy Chris shared his time with us, and yeah, we got to get him back on to get some more stories. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, I hope that you're continuing to enjoy these episodes. If there's someone that you'd like to have on the podcast, please reach out to Greg or myself. You can also check us out on cartbarnpodcast.com, our website. Till next week, thanks for listening to the Cart Barn Podcast.